She wasn't the bride he ordered. She was the miracle he never saw coming. When a single father opened his door to a woman with haunted eyes and twin girls clutching a dead flower, he didn't realize he was planting the first seed of the life he'd been too heartbroken to dream of. But sometimes love doesn't knock. Sometimes it takes root quietly, stubbornly in the dust. If stories of second chances, quiet courage, and unexpected grace speak to you, don't forget to subscribe. We have more stories like this just waiting to bloom. Now let me take you to a porch in the middle of nowhere, where everything truly began. The wind that swept through the red plains of Frontier End that morning tasted of rust and loneliness. It was the kind of wind that wrapped around a man's bones, reminded him that he was still alive, and whispered that maybe no one else remembered. Bo Carter stood on his porch, hands on his hips, boots coated in dust, watching the last train of the week hiss away from the distant station. He had no plans to be there, no one to greet, nothing to collect. And yet something made him climb into his old Ford and drive the 4 dusty miles into town. The platform was nearly deserted by the time he arrived. Most passengers had long scattered into their waiting cars or ambled off into town. All except one. She stood at the far end of the station, barely more than a silhouette against the harsh desert light. Her dress was simple, once white, now dulled by travel and fatigue. Her arms were tight around 2 small girls, perhaps 6 or 7, both clutching faded cloth bags and wearing matching straw hats that had clearly seen better days. Bo didn't need to be told. He recognized the look not just of someone lost, but of someone who'd run out of places to get lost in. The woman looked up as he approached, her eyes wide, not afraid, just tired in a way that went beyond sleep. One of the little girls stepped back, slightly hiding behind the folds of her mother's dress. The other stared straight at him, unblinking. "You waiting on someone?" Bo asked, his voice gravel but not unkind. The woman hesitated. Then slowly she reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to him with shaking fingers. Bo unfolded the letter. His name wasn't on it, but his brother's was. Luke Carter. Bo's chest tightened. He didn't need to read more than the first few lines to understand. It was one of Luke's letters, the ones he used to send through those mail-order bride catalogs he treated like gospel before the mine took his life 3 weeks ago. Bo had found the letter weeks ago in Luke's trunk, unopened, unsent. "You're Evelyn May," he said, folding the paper again, slower this time. She nodded once. "I didn't know I only found out when I got here. They said, the accident." Her voice cracked. "There's no one left." Bo looked at the 2 girls again. One was chewing on the end of her sleeve. The other held a small potted plant, dead and brittle from the journey. "No," Bo said. "There's no one else." Evelyn's eyes searched his, but Bo didn't offer anything more. He didn't know what she was expecting. Sympathy, maybe. A solution. But all he had was an old truck, a patch of dry land, and a life that had been running on silence for years. Still something about the way the smaller girl clutched that dead plant. It looked like she'd been protecting it for days, stuck in his throat. "You've got a place to stay?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not anymore." Bo exhaled. He looked up at the sky, as if waiting for it to talk him out of what he was about to do. It didn't. "My place is a few miles up," he said. "It ain't fancy. No electricity in half the rooms, well-pump leaks, and the hens scream like dying witches. But there's a roof. And water. Enough for now." Evelyn blinked, startled. I can't impose. We'll figure something else out." "You've got 2 little girls and a cactus skeleton in your hands," Bo replied. "You're not imposing. You're surviving. There's a difference." The girls looked up at their mother, their faces unreadable but clinging. Evelyn hesitated, then finally nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Bo turned to lead them to the truck. As he opened the door, he saw her carefully place the dead plant on the passenger seat, beside the girls, like it was a sacred thing. They rode in silence for the first mile. The girls sat close together in the back arms, brushing as if separating would make them disappear. Evelyn watched the land pass her gaze, drifting over cracked earth, low brush, and the occasional fence in mid-collapse. This land always so dry, she asked more to herself than him. "Drier lately," Bo answered. "Folks used to say it was cursed. Then they just stopped talking about it." "I used to live on a farm," Evelyn murmured, "back in Pennsylvania. We had roses, pinks, yellows, even black ones. Nothing like this." Bo looked at her from the corner of his eye. "You grow things." "Used to," she said, voice low. "Not anymore." They reached the ranch at sunset. The house was weather-worn but not without charm. Wraparound porch, crooked mailbox, an old windmill creaking as if trying to remember a song. Bo carried the heavier bags inside. The girls followed quiet as ghosts. Evelyn lingered on the porch for a moment. She looked at the soil beneath her feet, red, cracked, unwelcoming. Then she knelt down, cupped a bit of it in her hand, and let it fall back through her fingers, like ash. That night, Bo couldn't sleep. From his window, he watched her step out into the yard, under a dim lantern light. She held the dead plant in her hands again. He thought she might bury it, but instead, Evelyn gently plucked off its last remaining leaf and pressed it into the ground beside the porch. Then she stood and walked back inside. Morning on the Carter Ranch began not with the crow of a rooster, but with the sound of water hitting tin. The old well pump behind the shed let out a stuttering cough every few seconds, as if offended by being disturbed before sunrise. Bo stood by. Its sleeves rolled to his elbows, coaxing out enough water to fill a bucket. The handle groaned like an old man. Across the yard, the porch was still cloaked in the last shadows of night, but he could already see the faint outline of the plant Evelyn had buried. The dry wind hadn't even shifted the soil around it. He didn't understand it. Maybe he wasn't supposed to. He just knew what he saw: a woman who'd traveled across the country to marry a dead man, and who now sat in his kitchen, stirring yesterday's coffee, like she didn't belong anywhere else. Inside the cabin smelled like something warm, eggs maybe. Flour. Evelyn was at the stove, wearing one of his old flannel shirts over her travel dress, the sleeves rolled sloppily above her elbows. The twins sat at the small wooden table, Emery drawing circles in the dust with her finger, while Eliza neatly cut a slice of cornbread and lined it up like a soldier on a plate. Evelyn nodded to Bo when he entered, her voice soft. "Hope it's all right I used what you had. Just wanted to keep the girls busy." Bo sat down. "You cook quiet." Evelyn half smiled, setting down the spatula. "I talk enough in my head." "Fair." She slid the pan aside. "There's something I should show you." He looked up. Her eyes were steady, not panicked, not pleading, just resolved. She walked over to her worn satchel on the counter, opened it, and pulled out a stack of letters bound in twine. 7 of them, all addressed to her. Same handwriting. "Luke's. I found these in the last post drop before I left Philadelphia," she said. "They were all sent within 2 weeks before he passed. I didn't open them until last night." Bo leaned forward, silent. Evelyn untied the bundle and handed him the top letter. Bo unfolded it with care. The pages were thick, smudged in places like they'd been written under strain. Luke's handwriting was still strong, but rushed, less romantic than usual. The letter wasn't filled with sweet nothings. It was filled with names. 7 names. Each letter, she explained, was about one of the children Luke had either helped housed or promised to protect. Most had no family. Some, like the twins, had been abandoned by men Evelyn would not speak of. Luke had intended to adopt them formally, one by one, after their marriage. He'd even started building a back room onto the cabin Beau had torn it down last winter, thinking it was a failed storage shed. "I didn't come here thinking I was walking into a family," Evelyn said. But Luke knew what he was doing. He wasn't looking for a bride, he was trying to leave a mother behind. Beau didn't speak. His throat was too tight. Outside, the wind pushed against the window panes, as if it, too, wanted to hear what came next. Evelyn gathered the letters and sat down at the table beside Eliza, brushing a curl from the girl's cheek. "I'm not asking you to take us in, Beau," she said. "I just needed to know if what he wrote meant anything to you." Beau looked at the child. She stared up at Evelyn like she was the moon. The way she leaned into that touch, not tentative but starving, told him all he needed to know. "You can stay," he said finally. "Not because of Luke. Because I think you already did." Evelyn looked surprised. "What do you mean?" Beau stood, grabbed his worn hat from the wall hook. "Come on, I want to show you something." They walked past the barn through the dry patch of what used to be his mother's vegetable garden. There wasn't much left, just cracked earth and a rusted watering can buried halfway in the ground, like a forgotten toy. He pointed to the porch from afar. "She used to grow roses," he said. "Tried to plant them up there. Never worked. Too dry, too hot, too stubborn." Evelyn stared at the soil where she'd planted the piece of the dead cactus the night before. The wind had already worn down the top layer of dirt, but the spot still held its shape. She wanted color where there wasn't any, Beau said. Every year she'd try something new. It was a fight. But she called it her garden of grit. Evelyn knelt down. That's what it takes sometimes. A little grit, a lot of patience. Beau watched her trace the line of a dead vine with her finger, as if willing it back to life. "Do you want to try again?" he asked. She blinked. "Try with this garden. Not with roses. With whatever grows. We've got old seed packets in the cellar. Leftovers from when Ma still believed in spring." Evelyn's voice was quiet. "I haven't gardened since my husband died. The fire took our greenhouse. Took everything. I didn't think I had it in me anymore." Beau looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't fragile. She was fractured and somehow standing. He walked toward the cellar door, grabbed the metal box of seed packets, and handed them to her. "Then let's see if something still grows in you." She opened the lid. Inside were beans, herbs, wildflower squash. Most had expiration dates long past. But Evelyn didn't hesitate. She picked one lavender and held it like a sacred promise. "We'll need compost," she said. "We've got a heap behind the barn. A hoe rusty, but it works." She stood dirt-streaked on her dress, the seed packet still in hand. "Then we start at sundown. It's always been my favorite hour." Beau smiled. "That's when the ground's most tired, easier to talk it into giving." She gave him a sideways glance. "You talk to your land." He shrugged. "Used to. Maybe it's time someone else answered." As they turned back toward the house, the wind softened just a little. And for the first time in a long while, Beau Carter believed in the possibility of roots. The ground at Carter Ranch had not been tilled in years. The soil wasn't just dry, it was distrustful. Every crack in it felt like a scar from promises broken long ago. Even the crows didn't bother landing anymore. Beau often joked that the earth here was too tired to argue. But that evening, just before sundown, Evelyn knelt beside the porch with a rusted hoe, her hair pinned back in a loose knot. Sleeves rolled above her elbows. The girl sat nearby on a wool blanket, quietly sorting seed packets like treasures. Beau brought out a bucket of compost from behind the barn. It smelled awful. But Evelyn didn't flinch. "You sure you want to do this here?" he asked. She looked up, wiping sweat from her brow. If I'm going to start again, I want it where I see it every morning. Bo respected that. He handed her the bucket and sat beside the twins. Eliza handed him a packet of green beans, her eyes expectant. "Those grow fast," she said softly. "We can see them change." He nodded, "And they're hard to kill." Evelyn chuckled from the dirt. "That's the spirit." By the time the sky turned lavender gray, they dug 4 narrow rows. The girls dropped seeds carefully, Evelyn covering them with a practiced flick of her wrist. Bo watched the way she moved, controlled, sure, like someone who'd fought her way back from a place darker than drought. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. Later that night, after the girls had fallen asleep in the extra room, Bo had cleared out. Evelyn stood on the porch, holding a tin can with 3 leftover seeds and no labels. She set them carefully beside the front step and stared out at the open yard. Bo came up beside her, rubbing the back of his neck. "You always this quiet when you work?" She glanced at him. "I used to hum. All the time. My husband said it made things grow better." Bo didn't reply at first. Then he said, "Do you miss him?" Evelyn took a breath, the night air dry in her lungs. "I miss who I thought I'd become with him. That's different than missing someone," Bo said. She nodded. "That's why it's harder." They stood in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't feel empty. Then Evelyn turned to go inside, pausing in the doorway. "Thank you for letting us stay." Bo nodded. It wasn't a favor. Evelyn gave a small smile. "I know. That's why it means more." By the end of the week, green broke the surface. The first sprout came from Eliza's row. She ran in to tell Evelyn before breakfast, barefoot and breathless. Evelyn dropped the mixing spoon right into the pancake batter, wiped her hands, and ran outside like a child herself. The girls clapped as if it were Christmas. Evelyn knelt and touched the tiny green shoot with 2 fingers. "She's here," she whispered. "Who?" Emery asked. "The one who believed we'd come back." Bo, watching from the doorway, didn't know if she meant the land or herself. Word spread in town faster than Bo liked. Frontier End wasn't the kind of place where people had much to do, but watch other people try and fail. So when Miss Lorna Bell stopped by the ranch with a paper bag of expired sunflower seeds, Bo knew the garden had become a topic. "I thought you might want these," she said, handing them to Evelyn like peace offerings. Evelyn blinked. "Thank you." Lorna sniffed. "Don't go thinking we're all hostile. We just don't like surprises." Bo leaned against the porch post. "She's not a surprise. She's what the place needed." Lorna raised an eyebrow. That's so Evelyn didn't flinch. "This isn't my land. But maybe the things I grow here can still belong." Lorna stared a moment, then nodded once. "I'd start with the sweet corn. It forgives." When she left, Evelyn looked down at the seeds. "Even doubt has roots, doesn't it?" Bo chuckled. "Especially in Frontier End." That night, as Evelyn tucked in the girls, Eliza asked, "Mama, will the plants know we love them?" Evelyn smoothed a hand over her daughter's hair. "They'll know if you don't." In the hallway, Bo listened, not to eavesdrop, but because it had been years since anyone had spoken softly in that room. He went out to the porch and sat beside the empty tin can Evelyn had left there days ago. To his surprise, the smallest seedling had emerged. No label, no name. It was fighting through the soil like it had something to prove. He smiled. 2 days later, trouble came, not in the form of words, but in silence. Evelyn had walked into town with the girls to buy flour and thread. When they returned, the front row of the garden had been trampled. Boot prints in the dirt. A snapped row of green beans. The seedlings from the mystery tin gone. Evelyn didn't say anything. Neither did the girls. They simply stood staring as the wind kicked up the ruined soil. Bo came out with his shotgun face hard. "Don't," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "Whoever did this, Knows I care, she replied, and wanted to take something that wasn't even theirs to begin with. Eliza knelt beside the snapped row. Can we fix it? Evelyn nodded. Not today. But we will. That night, Bo walked past her room and found Evelyn sitting at the table with the seed box, sorting what remained. Her hands were calm, focused, not angry, anchored. You're not mad, he asked. She didn't look up. You can't hate someone into healing, Bo. He leaned against the doorframe. You believe in second chances, I believe in dirt, she said softly. It doesn't care what you did yesterday. It just asks what you'll plant today. Sheriff Nolan Briggs didn't usually bother with matters as minor as gardens. In a town like Frontier End, his job was mostly to keep drunks from falling into barbed wire, ensure cattle drives didn't block the Chapel Road on Sundays, and remind teenagers that fireworks weren't legal just because the sky was dark. He preferred quiet. And ever since Bo Carter's brother died, Bo had been just that quiet, distant a man, content with isolation. So when a whisper at the diner mentioned a woman and 2 children living out at Carter Ranch, he felt obligated to check. Not because he suspected crime Frontier End was too poor for much of that, but because change was a bigger threat than theft around here. He drove the county truck past the chapel, the schoolhouse, the general store, where Miss Lorna Bell had conveniently paused, sweeping her front step to catch his eye. She didn't wave, but he saw the slight tilt of her head. She knew where he was going. By the time he reached the Carter place, the sun was climbing, and a light dust hung like breath over the horizon. Nolan parked just outside the gate and walked up the path, boots crunching against gravel. Bo was on the porch, as Alway Hat tipped back a slow chew of straw between his teeth. You expecting me? Nolan asked. Bo shrugged, figured someone would come poking. Nolan stopped at the bottom of the steps, eyeing the half-rebuilt garden beds. The soil had been disturbed, retouched with care. A few of the trampled rows now bore shy green shoots again, smaller, but determined. She's a gardener, he asked. Bo nodded. And then some. What's her name? Evelyn May Whitmore. Mail-order bride. Bo didn't answer right away. That's how it started. Not how it's going. Nolan's eyes drifted to the front window, where 2 girls peeked out. One waved cautiously. The other just stared. She got paperwork. Working on it, Bo said evenly. It's messy. Her husband-to-be, my brother, died before she arrived. And those 2 girls, Evelyn's daughters. Not from my brother. So she just showed up with kids, no husband, and no legal residence. Bo's jaw tensed. You're here to arrest someone or to drink coffee and try one of her biscuits. Nolan blinked. That a real offer, Bo nodded toward the door. Inside the kitchen smelled like something sweet and lemony. Evelyn stood at the counter wiping her hands on a towel. She didn't flinch when she saw the sheriff, didn't even pause. I made extra, she said. It's not a bribe. It's just how I was raised. Nolan sat slowly at the table, eyeing the tin plate in front of him. There were warm, thick biscuits on it, one already cut open and slathered with what looked like apricot jam. He picked it up, bit in, and closed his eyes for a second longer than he meant to. I had a grandmother who made biscuits like this, he said quietly. Evelyn smiled faintly. Then I hope she'd forgive me for not measuring. Nolan set the biscuit down. I'm not here to cause trouble. But you know how people talk. Bo's not exactly known for his hospitality. And bringing in someone new, especially someone with no paper trail, puts me in a spot. Evelyn nodded. I understand. Nolan glanced around. The house had changed. He noticed it immediately, small touches. A checkered towel hung over the oven handle, dried wildflowers in a mason jar on the windowsill, 2 child-sized jackets on the back of a chair, the kind of details no man bothered with unless he had a reason to care. You intend to stay? He asked. Evelyn took a moment before answering. I intend to grow something that lasts. That wasn't the answer he expected, but it was enough. Outside, the girls had returned to the garden. One held a watering can too big for her hands and wobbled as she poured. The other gently propped up a seedling with a twig. You know, Nolan said, chewing slowly, this place hasn't looked alive since Beau's mother passed. And even then, barely. He stood brushing crumbs from his uniform. Don't give me a reason to do anything official, he added. But if someone were to draft a petition for permanent residency, say, with letters of support, I know a few folks who might sign. Evelyn tilted her head. Including the sheriff, Nolan grinned. Well, I did eat 2 biscuits. That evening, as golden light spilled across the porch, Beau brought out the seed box and set it beside Evelyn. Sheriff, give you grief? She asked. Beau sat beside her. Nah, he had your biscuits. You're safe, she smiled. For now. Beau watched the twins playing in the dirt, digging little ditches and mounding up hills like they were building kingdoms. You scare easily, he asked. Evelyn frowned. Not anymore. Why, because this, he gestured toward the house. The garden the girls is starting to look like something worth protecting. And that means risk. Evelyn leaned back against the porch post. Beau, I've lost a house in a fire, a husband to grief, and my voice to silence. Nothing left to fear except forgetting how to try. Beau looked at her. Really looked. Not at the woman who had arrived dusty and weary off a train, but at someone who piece by piece was claiming this dry, stubborn land with nothing more than seeds and belief. I'm not offering you a fairy tale, he said. I'm not looking for one, she replied. I'm looking for a place where trying counts. He hesitated, then reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out something wrapped in a scrap of cloth. He handed it to her. Inside was a single polished brass tag faded with time. It had belonged to Beau's dog when he was a boy. The dog had planted itself at his mother's side every day while she gardened right up until its last breath. Evelyn looked at the tag. Rusty Beau nodded. He always picked the spot where the ground gave easiest. Smartest gardener I ever met. Evelyn smiled, eyes warm. Then I'll plant him beside the cucumbers. They both laughed, not loudly, but like they'd forgotten for a moment how heavy life had been. And on the porch behind them, the girls sang softly. Not a real song, just a tune made up as they went, their voices lilting into the dusk. Beau didn't stop them. Some gardens grew best when no one tried to name them too soon. The rains never came that summer. By the 3rd week of June, the garden gasped under the weight of silence. Leaves curled inward like closing fists. The soil, once soft and promising, turned brittle, like the earth had changed its mind about allowing beauty. Evelyn stood at the edge of the beds each morning, kettle in one hand, squinting into the heat. She rationed the well water like it was liquid gold, splitting every bucket among children cooking and crops. The girls helped learning how to measure not just in ounces, but in heart. It's not dying, she said one morning as Eliza stared at a withering squash vine. It's waiting. Eliza nodded, but her eyes shimmered. Beau had gone quiet again, not from withdrawal, but worry. The well was sputtering more often, and though he hadn't said anything, Evelyn noticed he'd stopped using water to shave. You ever had a crop fail? She asked one night, watching him scrub his hands with a dry rag. Plenty, Beau replied. When Ma was alive, we planted a whole hillside of corn, never got higher than a kitten's tail. What did she do? He thought for a moment. She painted a scarecrow just the same. Said, if nothing else, the crows deserved company. Evelyn smiled at that. Your mother was wise. She was stubborn. There's a difference. Evelyn looked at him, then eyes warm but tired. Sometimes that's the only wisdom we get. July brought heat like punishment. The wind, once dry and mischievous, turned sharp and punishing. Dust coated every surface. Even the chickens stopped clucking, just paced the yard like inmates. Still, the girls persisted. Every day after chores, they filled a teacup with the last inch of water and took turns pouring it into the roots of their secret plant, a marigold growing wild behind the shed. They talked to it, sang, named it June after the happiest day they'd had so far. Evelyn watched them, hands clasped in her lap, letting them believe what they needed to. She didn't tell them marigolds were hardy because they knew how to survive neglect. That truth could wait. One morning, the garden looked worse. Brown edged every green. Evelyn didn't say a word, just tightened her apron and walked to the barn where Bo was repairing a hinge. "Let's talk about giving it up," she said plainly. Bo wiped his brow. "Giving what up? The garden? The season's too far gone. The girls are starting to blame themselves." He set the hammer down carefully. "You giving up? I'm tired, Bo." He looked at her, and for the first time since she arrived, she looked breakable. Not broken, but so close to the edge that one kind word might undo her. "I've seen you carry water with blisters on your palms," he said. "I've seen you coax smiles out of kids who used to flinch at shadows. If this soil dies, it's not on you. But it's not your job to protect us from trying either." Evelyn blinked, not from emotion but from sheer surprise. Then she nodded once and left without another word. That night, Bo rose at 3 a.m. The house was still. Even the breeze had stopped. He took the last of the rain barrels, only half full, and poured it carefully down the longest garden row. Then he sat on the porch, in the dark, watching the stars, like they owed him something. A few days later, the marigold bloomed. Bright, defiant, orange like a flame that wouldn't quit. Eliza screamed with joy and dragged Evelyn outside. Emery stood beside her sister, holding the petals as if they were spun glass. Bo emerged from the barn, wiping sawdust from his shirt. "Looks like June made it." Evelyn knelt, brushing soil from the stem. She made it because someone believed when the rest of us quit. Bo said nothing, but a faint grin tugged at his cheek. Then came the knock. Evelyn was kneading dough when it came, 3 short raps on the door, crisp and official. She wiped her hands and opened it to find a man in a brown suit, thin tie, and city shoes, far too clean for the Carter porch. "Mrs. Evelyn May Whitmore?" he asked. Her spine straightened. "Yes." He handed her an envelope, nodded, and turned without another word. Bo appeared behind her as she stood frozen, reading the return address. U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service. "What is it?" he asked. Evelyn opened the envelope, hand steady but cold. Her visa was under review. Due to procedural inconsistencies with the original marriage sponsorship and a lack of formal residency papers, her stay in the U.S. was not guaranteed. There was a court hearing scheduled in 2 weeks. Evelyn sat down, the letter dangling in her hand. Bo leaned against the doorframe. "What do we do?" She looked at him, eyes no longer shocked but steady. "We don't give up on what we planted." That night, the girls brought her a piece of paper. It was wrinkled, drawn in crayon. A flower lopsided but vibrant with petals, labeled "Hope Home Mama Bo" and "Dirt." In the center was Evelyn's name in shaky block letters. "We're going to give this to the judge," Emery said confidently. "Because it's true," Eliza added. Evelyn couldn't speak. She just hugged them both fiercely, like soil refusing to let go of its roots. Frontier End hadn't seen rain in 63 days. And yet on the morning of Evelyn's visa hearing letter, something impossible broke through the soil behind the porch, a single pale blue blossom with frilled edges and a stem so thin it looked like a painted thread. It stood near the wooden step, where Evelyn had once buried the brittle remains of a dead cactus back when she first arrived with no place to go and nothing to believe in. She found it just after sunrise, barefoot, holding her cup of weak coffee still dressed in Beau's oversized flannel. The sight stopped her breath. It wasn't just the bloom, it was what bloomed. Beau, roused by the sound of her calling his name, soft but urgent, stepped onto the porch, boots unlaced and shirt rumpled. "You all right?" he asked, eyes scanning the yard. She pointed wordlessly. Beau followed her gaze to the flower. It was no more than 6 inches tall. Fragile, quiet, but unmistakable. Evelyn crouched down, her hand hovering just inches above the bloom. "It's called a blue columbine," she whispered. "State flower of Colorado, but my mother used to grow them back east. Said they were cursed out here. Said no seed would ever take to desert soil." Beau knelt beside her, eyebrows furrowed. "You plant it?" She shook her head. "I haven't seen one since I was 17. There's no way." She stopped swallowing. "No way, it just showed up," he finished. And yet, there it was, delicate, vivid, absurd. "I think Evelyn said slowly it grew from the cactus." Beau looked at her. She didn't blink. They said nothing more. Not because there wasn't more to say, but because sometimes wonder was best left unspoken. Over the next 2 days, the columbine became a sort of quiet shrine. The girls placed flat stones around it like a border. Hattie, the neighbor's daughter, who often wandered over without asking, stuck a popsicle stick beside it, with the word "lucky" written in blue ink. Even the town seemed to lean toward the Carter place. Miss Lorna Bell dropped off a basket of ripe peaches with a note. No words, just sunshine. Pastor Jerry sent a children's Bible, its pages, tucked with pressed flowers from his wife's garden. Sheriff Nolan Briggs passed by twice, stopping just long enough to look at the bloom and tip his hat. Something was shifting, not just in the soil, but in the people, and yet the letter on the mantle remained. Beau had read it 3 times, even tried calling the immigration office from the payphone in town, only to be met with long waits and canned voices. The reality was simple. Without proper paperwork, Evelyn could be deported. She didn't complain, didn't panic. But Beau noticed how she moved more slowly now, as if rehearsing departure in her bones. One evening after the girls had gone to bed, he found her in the kitchen, refolding their clothes for the 2nd time. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." He stepped closer. "I won't let them take you." She turned. "Beau, it's not about letting or not letting. It's the law. I don't care. You have to." He leaned against the wall, jaw clenched. "You remember what you said, that the land doesn't care what you did yesterday, just what you'll plant today." Evelyn nodded. "Well, I'm planting my foot in this fight." A silence passed between them, taut and brittle. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said. "You already did," Beau replied, his voice gentler now. "You made a whole town remember what it feels like to hope again." Evelyn stared at him, then reached for his hand. "If I'm sent away—" "You're not." "But if Beau—" He held her hand tighter. "Then I'll come after you." Her lips curved. "You'd follow a mail-order bride across the country." He smiled. "No. I'd follow the woman who made flowers grow in a place that forgot how." The week before the hearing, the twins came to Evelyn with a plan. "We want to make a garden sign," Emery said. "With your name on it," Eliza added. Evelyn smiled. "Why?" "So the judge knows this is your place," Emery said. "Your real place." Beau helped them carve the letters into a wide cedar board salvaged from the old barn, Evelyn's garden, where love took root. They painted it with cheap acrylics, purple-green, and streaks of yellow. It wasn't pretty, but it was theirs. That Sunday, Beau loaded the truck, and they drove to church. The garden sign sat proudly in the back, tied with rope fluttering as they passed the dusty road. At the service, Pastor Jerry, without preamble, stepped forward with a letter in hand. "I've written a statement of character for Evelyn Whitmore," he said to the congregation. "If any of you would like to sign, the pages are in the back." He paused. Frontier End doesn't often ask to be noticed, but today I think we should. By the end of the service, over 70 signatures adorned the letter, including the town's doctor, the postmaster, the owner of the diner, and every single member of the women's quilting circle. Evelyn stood in the back, speechless. Sheriff Briggs walked past her, nodding once. "Told you those biscuits were persuasive." That night, the wind shifted. The heat broke. A cloud passed over the moon. And just before dawn, the first drop of rain hit the porch roof. It didn't pour. Not yet. But it was enough for the earth to raise its head and listen. Evelyn stood barefoot again, watching the columbine. A single drop slid down its petals, like a tear caught in a smile. Behind her, Bo stepped out with 2 mugs of coffee. "You ready for tomorrow?" he asked. She didn't turn. "No," he nodded. "Me neither." Then he handed her the mug. And they stood side by side, as the sky finally quietly began to remember how to weep. The morning of the hearing arrived with a strange kind of reverence in the air. Not fear, not excitement, just the quiet that falls when something important is about to happen, and everyone knows it, even the wind. Bo woke before sunrise, tying his boots in the dark. Evelyn was already in the kitchen, packing a cloth bag with the documents Pastor Jerry had assembled. The community letter and the girl's drawing folded carefully between 2 pieces of cardboard to keep it from bending. She wore a pale blue dress that had been altered to fit her better, a hand-me-down from Miss Lorna Bell, who'd left it hanging on the porch with a note. "It has some hope sewn in. Might fit you, too." The twins were silent as they ate their oatmeal, their spoons scraping softly. Emery clutched a bundle of wildflowers they'd picked before dawn. Eliza had braided her own hair and tied the ends with mismatched ribbons. Bo stood by the door with his car keys and a rare collared shirt. He looked at the girls, then at Evelyn. "You ready?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. "But I'm not afraid." He nodded. "Then we're doing just fine." The courthouse in Red Rock was 2 towns over a 40-minute drive down a long stretch of highway, bordered by open ranch land and scrub. Bo drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely on his thigh. Evelyn sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "You don't have to say anything," he told her. "I know. But if they ask why you stayed, why here, why us, I want you to tell them the truth." Evelyn turned her head. "Which part?" "The part where this place started breathing again when you touched it." Her eyes misted, but she smiled. "That's your version. Mine's simpler. Let's hear it." She paused. "I stayed because the dirt remembered me." Bo didn't reply, but he reached over and took her hand. They held it in the space between them all the way to Red Rock. The hearing room was smaller than expected. 3 chairs behind a desk, 1 judge, 1 clerk, and a single flag in the corner. A ceiling fan hummed overhead, cutting through the heat with minimal success. Evelyn sat straight-backed, her hands folded in her lap. Bo sat behind her, with the girls on either side, their feet swinging above the floor. The judge, a gray-haired man named Hollingsworth, reviewed her file in silence for nearly 5 minutes before speaking. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said finally, "your original immigration was tied to a marriage that did not occur. You have no immediate relatives in this country. You have not yet applied for a change in status. Why should the court allow you to remain?" Evelyn didn't rush to answer. She reached slowly into her bag and pulled out the folder with the community petition letters of support and a small envelope of photos. She stood and approached the desk. I understand the facts, she said clearly. I know what the rules say, but if you'll allow, I'd like to show you what the law doesn't cover. She handed the judge the petition first, then the photos, children playing in dirt-streaked clothes, a garden blooming behind a wooden sign that read, Evelyn's Garden, where love took root. Then, without a trace of performance, she pulled out the girl's drawing. My daughters made this, she said. They drew it before they knew what a courthouse was, before they knew what immigration meant. They just knew what home felt like. The judge looked down at the crayon-covered paper. Bright petals, a crooked stem. Words like hope, family dirt, and mama. He adjusted his glasses. Do you consider Frontier End your home? He asked. Evelyn didn't hesitate. No, Your Honor. I consider it my miracle. There was no grand speech, no violin swell in the background, just truth spoken so plainly it echoed in the room. Judge Hollingsworth set the papers down, took a breath, and said, This court will need a few days to issue a formal ruling. In the meantime, Mrs. Whitmore, you are granted temporary residency under community protection status. You are free to return home. Home. The words sat in the air like incense rich lasting. Back in Frontier End, word traveled faster than thunder. By the time the old Ford rumbled into Beau's driveway, there were 3 pies cooling on the porch, a handwritten note from the pastor tacked to the door. We knew. But now it's official. And a bouquet of lavender from the quilting circle tied with the red, white, and blue ribbon left over from the county fair. Evelyn stood by the garden gate, looking at the beds, now alive with green. Beau stepped beside her. You all right? She nodded. I think the soil's forgiven me, he chuckled. Took its time. She glanced sideways. So did you. Beau didn't deny it. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. Pastor gave me this, he said. Said, it's up to you. She opened it. A blank marriage license application. No date, no pressure. Just names waiting to be written. She looked up. Are you proposing? She asked, one eyebrow raised. Beau shrugged. I'm suggesting. She folded the paper carefully, slipped it into her pocket, and replied, Then I'll think about it. Over dinner. He grinned. That's not a no. No, she said, reaching down to brush her fingers along a row of snap peas. It's just the start of something that deserves to grow slow. That evening, after the sun had dipped and the porch lantern flickered against the wood, Evelyn stepped outside barefoot again. The blue columbine stood taller, now joined by 3 more, just like it. As if the first had whispered to the rest, It's safe. You can come. She whispered something to them too, not words, but breath. Behind her, Beau strummed a few slow chords on the porch swing, while the girls danced in mismatched socks beneath the stars. And above them all, Frontier End exhaled dust and doubt and drought, giving way at last to bloom. It began with a creak, a low, rhythmic whine that echoed through the still morning air like a memory trying to find its voice. Evelyn looked up from the garden row, wiping sweat from her brow, and saw Beau kneeling beneath the wide pecan tree just past the porch. The branches arched overhead like a cathedral of bark, and leaves a lone witness to the passage of decades. He was measuring rope, good rope, pulling it tight against an old wood beam he'd sanded smooth the night before. The girls watched from a few feet away, whispering and fidgeting, too excited to hide it. Evelyn stood and walked toward them, dust streaking her forearms. What are you up to? Beau looked up, squinting against the sun. Something long overdue. She raised an eyebrow. He gestured toward the beam. When Luke and I were boys, Ma always said, this tree needed a swing. Said every family should have one. Evelyn smiled faintly. So, this is about tradition. He paused. No, this is about them. He nodded toward the girls who were now hopping from foot to foot as Bo secured the final knot. With a grunt, he lifted the beam into place and tightened the rope. Then he tested it with his own weight. The swing held. "You built that fast," Evelyn said. Bo stood back, arms crossed. "Some things you just know how to do." He looked at her, then really looked. Not with the guarded hesitation of strangers becoming something more, but with the steady calm of a man who had decided, fully and without fear, that he belonged right where he was. Evelyn felt her chest tighten in that sweet, painful way she hadn't known since the earliest days of love. But this wasn't young love, reckless and roaring. This was quieter, rooted, like the pecan tree itself. "Go on," Bo said, motioning to the girls. "Give it a try." They didn't need a second invitation. Eliza clambered onto the wooden seat, first, her braids flying as Bo gave a gentle push. She shrieked with joy, and soon Emery was behind her, waiting her turn. Laughter rippled through the yard like water through dry stone. Evelyn watched it all with one hand over her heart. That evening the garden shimmered under golden light. Bo grilled corn and chicken out back, while Evelyn helped the girls make lemonade from a bag of lemons Miss Lorna Bell had gifted them in case life ever handed you more than one. Dinner was eaten outside, paper plates, knees tucked, barefoot toes in the dirt. The swing creaked now and then, empty, but still swaying like it had learned to move on its own. Evelyn sipped her lemonade and glanced at Bo. "You always wanted kids," he considered the question. "Didn't think I'd be good at it." She smiled, and now Bo looked toward the house where Emery was feeding the chickens and Eliza was humming to her marigold. "I think I'm better at it than I deserve to be." Evelyn didn't speak. Instead, she reached over and placed her hand lightly on his knee. "You deserve all of it," she said. Later that week, Evelyn noticed something strange. The swing had become a place. It wasn't just a toy. It was a stage, a confessional, a launching pad for laughter and sometimes tears. One afternoon, she found Hattie, the neighbor girl, sitting on it alone, gently swinging with a letter clutched in her lap. Evelyn didn't intrude. She simply brought a glass of water and sat nearby. Hattie finally spoke. "My mama's going to remarry. She says I should call him Dad." Evelyn tilted her head. "And how do you feel about that?" "I don't know," Hattie whispered. "What if he leaves like the first one?" Evelyn leaned back, watching the swing sway. "Then he wasn't the kind of father you deserved." Hattie looked down. "But what if there isn't one who stays?" Evelyn smiled softly. "Then you make your own family, from people who show up and stay long enough to build a swing." Bo kept improving it. A week later, he added 2 small handles for balance, then a second rope ladder so both girls could climb the tree itself. He started leaving a pillow on the seat at night so the morning dew wouldn't soak it through. It became his silent project, the thing he did when he didn't know what else to do. Evelyn understood that. She had her garden. Bo had the swing. One morning, she found him beneath the tree, sanding down another plank of wood. "What's this for?" she asked. Bo nodded toward the trunk. "Thought we'd add a nameplate." She blinked. For the swing, for whoever made it matter. He handed her the plank. She looked down and saw her own name carved in quiet, cursive Evelyn's branch. Her throat tightened. "Bo." He stood, brushing off his hands. "You gave us roots. I figured it's time we gave you a limb." Evelyn swallowed hard. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Bo understood. They mounted the plank together just below the swing's anchor rope. It caught the morning sun like a charm, warm and golden. That evening the sky threatened rain again but held its breath. The air was thick with promise. The girls took turns swinging while Evelyn and Bo sat on the porch watching. "This swing," she murmured. "It's going to outlast us." Bo nodded. "Good. That's how you know it mattered." She rested her head lightly on his shoulder. You think the garden will last too?" He smiled. "It already has. The dirt knows your name now." Evelyn closed her eyes, listening to the creak of the ropes, the giggles of the girls, the hush of evening settling in like a lullaby over the land. She wasn't a visitor anymore. She was the branch they built everything else upon. The news came in the form of a white envelope sealed tight and slipped beneath the porch door in the early hours of morning. Evelyn found it just after sunrise when she stepped out barefoot to check the garden and noticed the wind hadn't moved the swing. The stillness unsettled her, as if the land itself was holding its breath. She picked up the envelope and read the return address, U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service notice of final determination. For a moment her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of a life that had become real. A life she hadn't planned, but now couldn't imagine walking away from. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she placed it on the kitchen table beside the girls' cereal bowls and went out back to clear her thoughts with the compost, the chickens, and the one tomato vine still producing against all odds. By the time she returned, Beau was already up pouring coffee with quiet precision. He didn't ask. He just nodded toward the envelope. "You want me to read it?" Evelyn shook her head. "Not yet." He poured her a cup, sat down across from her, and they drank in silence. Minutes passed. Then the girls shuffled in yawning and barefoot, their hair wild from sleep. Emery noticed the envelope first. "Is that it?" she whispered. Evelyn nodded. The girls exchanged a look, then dashed back down the hallway, leaving Evelyn and Beau blinking in surprise. A few minutes later, they returned arms full of crumpled drawings, dried flowers, a string of ribbon from the old quilt box, and a stack of folded notebook pages with shaky handwriting. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" Eliza laid everything gently on the table. "Making our petition." Beau leaned in. "Your what?" "Our petition," Emery said as if it were obvious. "For the government, in case they forgot how to feel." Evelyn pressed her lips together, fighting the sting behind her eyes. The next few hours unfolded like a secret ceremony. Emery organized the pages. Each child, including Hattie, who arrived with chocolate on her chin and a serious expression, wrote their own reasons why Evelyn should stay. The grammar was questionable. The spelling was worse. But the honesty in those crooked lines could have cracked stone. She sings to the seeds, even when she thinks we can't hear. She taught me how to be still when I'm scared. She makes things grow even when they're tired. She doesn't yell when we forget the eggs. She just reminds us soft. At the bottom of each note was a small flower pressed into the paper, marigold lavender, even a scraggly dandelion with roots still attached. Evelyn watched all of it unfold too, moved to stop them. Beau disappeared into the barn and returned an hour later with a long piece of oak sanded smooth. "We'll mount it here," he said, placing it at the edge of the garden. He carved a single word across the top with careful strokes, "belongs." They affixed each note below it, stringing them with twine and clothespins, letting the wind move them gently like prayer flags. By late afternoon, the petition fluttered in the breeze, drawing the attention of a few townsfolk passing by. Miss Lorna Bell showed up with a peach pie and a pen. Pastor Jerry arrived not long after, with a fresh, pressed shirt and a silent tear. Sheriff Briggs came on horseback, muttered, "I'm not crying," and signed the back of the swing in permanent marker. By nightfall, over 24 names were scribbled on petals, pages, and one paper plate, whatever they could find. Evelyn stood back and watched as people came, not because they had to, but because she had stayed. That night, Evelyn finally opened the envelope. Beau sat beside her at the kitchen table. The girls hovered in the hallway, too afraid to ask, but unable to walk away. Her hands were steady. The letter was short. "Dear Mrs. Evelyn May Whitmore, upon review of submitted community documentation, personal testimony, and evidence of public support under Section 245 of the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Act. Your application for permanent residency has been granted, effective immediately. Please retain this notice for your records. With respect, J. Reynolds, Clerk of Determinations. She didn't cry. She just leaned forward, folded the letter carefully, and exhaled so slowly it was as if she were releasing a decade of bracing. Bo looked at her, his voice a low rumble. "You're not going anywhere." She nodded, too full to speak. Then the girls ran in and tackled her in a tangle of limbs and laughter and joy, so loud it made the windows hum. The house, once a quiet museum of grief, sang. In the following days, the petition stayed up. People continued to come, not because of the visa, but because of what it had meant, what it had said. That belonging was not earned through papers. It was offered through roots and water and the courage to stay long enough to bloom. One afternoon, as Evelyn was trimming lavender near the porch, she found a new drawing tacked gently beside the word belongs. This one was different. It was drawn by Bo. A rough sketch of a house with a porch swing, a tree, a garden, and 5 stick figures standing hand in hand beneath the sun. At the bottom, in Bo's unmistakably blocky handwriting, were 3 words: "We are home." Evelyn pressed the drawing to her chest, looked toward the swing still swaying in the breeze, and whispered the only word that mattered now. Finally, summer waned, but the heat lingered like a guest, too stubborn to leave. By late August, the garden had outgrown its original plot. What started as 4 narrow rows had expanded into a crescent of green, hugging the edge of the porch and reaching toward the pecan tree. Tomatoes ripened in wild clumps. Cucumbers clung to trellises Bo had fashioned from old fence posts. Even the lavender Evelyn had nearly given up on now burst with purple swaying in the late afternoon breeze, like a line of dancers in perfect rhythm. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a devolution. At the center of it all stood the blue columbine, tall and dignified, still blooming long past its season, as if to say, "I am not done yet." Evelyn watched it often, usually with her hands in the soil or a straw hat shading her eyes. But today she wasn't alone. Bo stood beside her, holding a wooden post under one arm and a tin plaque under the other. She raised a brow. "That for the scarecrow." "No," he said, setting the post into the dirt. "This one's for you." She wiped her hands on her apron as he hammered the post into the ground, then stepped back to let her read the sign, "Evelyn's Garden Where Love Took Root." The letters were hand-etched, uneven but proud. Beneath them, Bo had added a small line in smaller type, founded not by water, but by staying. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Bo," he held up a hand. "Before you thank me, I've got one more thing." He motioned toward the house where the girls came down the steps carrying something between them. Evelyn squinted. It was a weathered bench, oak, refinished. The seat bore a single engraving along the backrest, the garden table. Bo nodded toward it. "Figured we needed somewhere to sit. Harvest days are coming." She smiled, blinking fast. "This is too much." He shook his head. "Evelyn, it's barely enough." That evening they held what Bo called a first fruit supper. It wasn't formal. No invitations, just word of mouth and pie crust. But by sundown, more than 20 people had arrived, neighbors, church folk, even the quiet man from the feed store who rarely left town. They gathered around the table under strings of yellow lights Evelyn had found in the barn. Bowls overflowed with sliced tomatoes, buttered squash, pickled beans, and corn roasted with rosemary. Miss Lorna brought a lemon chess pie. Hattie brought a jar of wild honey stolen from a cousin who didn't deserve it. Evelyn stood at the head of the table unsure of what to say. Then Pastor Jerry raised his glass of iced tea and said, "We don't need grace," said over this food tonight. "The garden already did it for us." Laughter rippled through the group, warm and true. As the meal unfolded, stories were told. Children darted between legs. Emery played a clumsy tune on a borrowed harmonica, while Eliza performed a dramatic reading of their new garden rules, which included no stepping on worms, no arguing with plants, and Bo must always taste test first. Later, as the sky dimmed and stars peeked through, Bo joined Evelyn on the swing. The girls lay on a blanket nearby, drowsy from watermelon and running barefoot. "You know Bo said this all started because you buried a dead plant." Evelyn leaned into him. "I didn't bury it. I planted what was left." He smiled. "And it gave us a whole life." She looked out over the yard softly, lit dotted with chairs and stories and dishes scraped clean. "I used to think healing was something that happened inside," she said. "But maybe it starts outside, in what you tend, in who you trust to sit beside you in the quiet." Bo nodded. "And in what you're brave enough to stay for." They rocked gently in the swing, the ropes creaking like an old lullaby. That night, as they cleaned up the last of the dishes and tucked the girls into bed, Evelyn stepped out into the garden alone. The stars above were thick and closed the kind of sky that made a person believe they weren't just in the world, but part of it. She knelt beside the columbine, now flanked by two smaller sprouts, offspring she hoped. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a folded square of paper. It was a letter. Not from the government or a town official, or even Bo. It was from herself. Written months ago, the day after she first arrived. She had written it at the kitchen table late at night, unsure if she would stay or go pouring onto paper all the things she couldn't say out loud. "Dear Evelyn," it began. "If you're reading this, it means you chose to stay. I hope you remember why." She read it slowly, tracing the words with her fingers. Then she folded it again and buried it gently in the soil beside the columbine. The land had taken so much. It deserved something to keep. The next morning, the sun rose gentle and gold spilling over the porch, the swing the girls curled together under a quilt, and the sign at the garden's edge. Evelyn stepped outside with her coffee and saw a new bloom, soft white edged in pink, growing just beside the place where she'd planted her letter. She didn't recognize the species. Maybe it was new. Maybe that was the point. She turned as Bo joined her, his hand finding hers without a word. And together, they watched the garden whisper its thanks. Autumn came gently to Frontier End, not in a rush of color like the Northeast, or a snap of cold like the Rockies. Here it was quieter. The heat softened. Shadows stretched longer. The pecan tree dropped its first brown leaves like secrets being released one by one. Evelyn loved this season most, not for what it took, but for what it left behind. The garden had slowed its breath, but not stopped. A second round of squash had surprised everyone. The lavender held on longer than expected. Even the marigolds refused to wilt, as if sensing the place needed their golden defiance just a little while longer. And in the middle of it all, the columbine still stood. Evelyn often found herself there in the early mornings, watching the mist settle along the dirt path between the porch and the swing. The roots beneath this place had grown quiet and deep, and so had she. Bo, never one for many words, had taken to carving things in the barn. Wooden spoons, handles, frames for the girls' drawings. Sometimes he'd hand Evelyn a small piece with no explanation, a heart no larger than a thumb, a bird with one wing folded a circle with no beginning or end. She kept them in a tin box beside her bed, like tokens from a man who didn't say, "I love you" often, but showed it every time he stayed through a silence. One afternoon, Bo came in with something different, a wooden post and a question in his eyes. Evelyn looked at it, then at him. He cleared his throat. "I thought we could build something more permanent." Her voice was soft. A shed, he smiled. A chapel. Evelyn blinked. Bo Carter. You're not asking me to marry you with a lumber order, are you? He shrugged, a touch of mischief behind his quiet. I figured if we built the place together, we'd both know it was solid. Evelyn stepped toward him, took his hand and whispered, Then let's make it wide enough for more chairs. This family's not done growing. They built the chapel at the edge of the garden. Not a real chapel, not with stained glass or pews. Just a structure of cedar and iron, open on 3 sides, with benches, facing a wooden arch, draped in muslin and wildflowers. The girls helped gather stones for the walkway. Hattie painted a sign that read, Love grows here. When Pastor Jerry came to bless it, he stood under the arch, looked around at the dirt, the swing, the patchwork quilt hung over one beam to block the afternoon sun, and said simply, You didn't build a church, you built a promise. And everyone agreed. Evelyn and Bo married in that promise 2 weeks later. There was no big crowd, just the people who had watched this love root and grow. Miss Lorna Bell brought a peach cobbler big enough to serve 30. Sheriff Briggs stood by the door, humming something off-key. The girls wore flower crowns made of rosemary and marigold, walking barefoot down the garden path, as Evelyn followed her dress simple, her smile incandescent. Bo met her beneath the arch, holding both hands like a man who knew exactly what he was planting and had no fear of the seasons to come. When Pastor Jerry asked if they wished to say vows, Evelyn spoke first. I came here with nothing but broken pieces. You didn't try to fix them. You just held the space while I learned to live with them. She turned to the girls who stood nearby, eyes bright. And you, she said, voice trembling. You taught me what it means to be needed in the quietest ways. Bo looked down, then up, then said just one line. I'm not promising you rain. Just my roots, wherever yours grow. It was enough. They kissed under the arch, while the garden swayed, and the sun spilled over the porch in quiet applause. Months passed, then years. The garden became more than just theirs. It became the heart of the town. Evelyn taught schoolchildren how to compost, how to whisper to seeds. Bo ran a woodworking table on Saturdays, for kids who didn't yet know they were strong. The swing was repaired 3 times, once after a storm, once after Hattie's brother fell out of it, laughing, and once when the ropes simply gave way from too much joy. The chapel hosted 4 more weddings, 2 memorials, 1 community dinner that turned into a dance under the stars. And always, always, the Columbine stood in the center. One crisp November morning, Evelyn found something tucked in the soil beside it. A small envelope yellowed with age, her name on the front in a child's handwriting. Inside was a note. Dear Mama Evelyn, I hope you know you saved us before you knew you did. I hope your garden never stops growing. I hope you always stay. It wasn't signed, but Evelyn recognized the handwriting. It was Emery's, from 2 years earlier. She pressed the note to her chest and looked up at the pecan tree, now dropping leaves like old memories. Bo found her there later, sitting in the swings, the note still in her lap. He sat beside her, and they rocked for a while without words. I used to think miracles were loud, she said at last. Big, sudden, flashy. Bo looked out over the garden, but now she smiled. Now I know they sound like this. She gestured to the creak of the swing, the soft rustle of the leaves, the distant laugh of children from the garden beds, the wind moving over roots that no one could see but everyone trusted were there. Bo reached over and took her hand. Together, they looked out over the life they hadn't expected, but had grown anyway. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but fully with both feet in the dirt. And beneath them, the miracle kept growing. If this story touched something quiet in you, maybe reminded you of a place, a person, or a season when love grew slowly. But surely, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and share your corner of the world with us. And if you'd like more stories like this about kindness, redemption, and the quiet miracles that still happen every day, feel free to subscribe. We'll be here waiting with another story when you are. Thank you truly for spending this time with us. It means more than you know.